entonces a Miriam Saade Meta, que va a ser la moderadora de este panel. Adelante.
Buenos días, qué mejor manera de empezar este panel que con esta canción que a todos nos toca, y la que no la conocía seguramente también les tocó el corazón. Para mí es un privilegio hoy presentar a Obed, que se ha convertido en un gran amigo mío, y el panel que vamos a escuchar hoy se llama La Esperanza en medio de la crisis. Un poquito de quién es Obed. El doctor Adomi Leshem es un psicólogo político fascinado por el concepto de esperanza durante al menos una década. Su interés por la esperanza y la ausencia de esperanza comenzó en el 2012 con sus primeros estudios experimentales sobre la inducción de esperanza. Desde entonces, Obed ha publicado numerosos artículos y capítulos de libros sobre la esperanza y la desesperación como fenómenos políticos, y ha dado conferencias sobre la esperanza ante una amplia gama de audiencias académicas y no académicas. Es autor del libro Hope Amidst Conflict, publicado recientemente por Oxford University Press. Obed enseña y lleva a cabo su investigación en la Universidad Hebrea, donde se desempeña como investigador asociado senior en el Laboratorio de Conciliación y Conflicto Intergrupal. Obed nació y creció en Jerusalén y actualmente reside con su familia en Tel Aviv. Antes de dedicarse a la investigación y a la docencia, trabajó como realizador de documentales y camarógrafo de noticias, cubriendo conflictos y guerras. No tomo más tiempo. Obed.
Good morning, everyone. I'm really honored and privileged to be here. Yesterday and today I met amazing people doing amazing work. For me, it's eye-opening to understand how Jewish communities across Latin America are working, are struggling, are trying to promote both Israel and their own communities. So I'm very honored to be here, and I want to thank Vivian for inviting me. We met 3 months ago, and I think the connection was very strong, and I really feel thankful for that. And before I start to talk about hope, which is what I study, as always, I mention the hostages. I also see that every time you also mention the hostages. This is so important. These are people that are now held in captivity. These are families that are worried so much for their loved ones. And this is also, like I said yesterday, this is also the glue that connects us. So let's pray that they will all be back. Amen. And so I've been studying this idea of hope for more than a decade, both as a philosophical idea, I try to understand what is hope, what is its meaning in the lives of people, also as a psychological construct, so I try to understand how hope works in our brain, but also as a political phenomenon, as something that mobilizes societies and people to create a better world for themselves. And I found that many people share this fascination with hope, right? It's very elusive. It's very hard to know what hope is, and so people are very fascinated by this concept. But also people ask me, is it appropriate to talk about hope now? We are in a real war. The trauma of the 7th of October is still happening as we speak. There is internal tensions within the Israeli society. There's anti-Semitism around the world. Is it okay to talk about hope now? Maybe we should wait a little bit. But what I think you and also I understand is that actually hope becomes important and relevant, especially in times of crisis, especially in times of hardship, of distress, of trauma. When we feel good about ourselves, when everything is nice in our world, and influences, hope is not big, is partial. But hope becomes relevant and meaningful in times of hardship, when we have a lot of challenges in front of us. And many times I give this example of a small candle flame. Think about the light from this small candle flame in a room with a lot of light. The influence of this candle, this tiny light, is nothing, is marginal. But as the room becomes darker, suddenly this tiny light from the small candle flame becomes significant and important and relevant. In fact, when the room is completely dark, this is where hope matters. This light matters the most, and hope functions in a similar way. So this is kind of a really interesting nature of hope, that it becomes important when it's almost gone. And so one of the first things I give to my students is I ask them to draw hope. To draw hope. And if you have some notebooks here, maybe try to draw what hope looks like. Not what you want to achieve, not what you hope for, but how does hope look like? If you could draw it, if you could visualize it, how does it look? If you want to try, let's give it maybe 30 seconds. Those who have notebooks, draw maybe something and share it. If hope could look like something, what would it look like? People want to share some drawings. You don't have to be Picasso here. Okay, this is a clock.
No.
This is sun, a sun. Abstract. Art. This is art. A circle. All right. Yeah. What do you have here? Okay, two people. Yeah. This is a heartbeat. Wow. Yeah, please. Path, derech.
A seed.
A small boy.
With a smile, right?
A seed.
Seed. So when I do this exercise, many people draw these type of things. Also sunrise, rainbow. Did I miss something? Shemesh. Yeah, sunrise. And so many people here drew things that are connected to happiness, right? A smiling face. And indeed, it's very intuitive to connect hope to things that are positive, to joyous things. But I want to show you a painting called Hope that was painted by an artist called George Watts. And this painting is called Hope. Not very happy, right? Quite gloomy. So we have this female figure, and she's sitting on a globe. And this globe is almost drowning. So there's a sense of hazard, there's a sense of danger here with Hope. And you see her eyes are covered. So she does not know where she's going, where the future is taking her. And indeed, hope is always tied to uncertainty. When we know where we're going, we don't need hope. We need hope in times of uncertainty. It becomes relevant in times of uncertainty and unpredictability. And she's playing on this harp, which is very old and broken, and it has only one string left. The others are torn. And she's plucking on this one tiny string, and she's listening to the note, the music. And she's trying very hard, and she's plucking on this string, on this broken harp, with her eyes covered when she's almost drowning. And this is hope. So hope is this ability, this very unique human ability to use some small positive signal in times of hardship, in times of distress, when we don't know where the future is taking us, when everything falls apart. And I think this is very, very relevant to the point that we are now. So we are talking about hope in the context of crisis, in the context of hardship. Now, in fact, this very positive, intuitive understanding that we have of hope is not shared by many philosophers. Many philosophers who talked about hope, from ancient Greek philosophers to postmodern philosophers, they talked about the downsides of hope. They said, listen, hope is dangerous. And it's important to understand the dangers of hope also, the shortcomings. So, for example, okay, this is very small for you. Okay, let's hope it's good. Okay.
But then hope is small.
Hope is small. So Nietzsche, right? He was not a very optimistic guy, let's admit it. But he said, hope is the worst of all evils. That is really small somehow. Okay. If it messes up, I have my own computer. Okay, maybe okay. So hope could devastate us as when it is dashed, when it is broken. And indeed, one of the things Nietzsche said is that hope is the worst of all evils. The worst. Why? Because it prolongs man's suffering. Think about it. Skeptical people, pessimists, have it easy. They know that nothing is going to work, so they're not anxious. It's the hopeful people, those that have high aspirations and high dreams and high desires, these are the ones that are anxious all the time, right? So hope comes with this anxiety and many times with pain. Spinoza, Descartes talked about hope as ignorance. Hope is for the foolish, they say. Why? Because as people, as humans, we must aspire for knowledge. The main purpose of humankind, this is Descartes and Nietzsche, is to know, not to hope. If we base our decisions on knowledge, that's good. This is what we need. If we base our decisions on hope, that's foolish. And indeed, many times hope could be connected to being naive. Hope could be connected to painting reality in rosy colors, when actually this is not the case. In times of hardship, people tend to paint the reality in rosy colors as if everything is nice, and this is sometimes could be tied to hope. Sometimes hope could lead us to dismiss challenges ahead just because we want something so badly. So this is another problem. And last, hope is very, very demanding. Hope is demanding. It's demanding actually in two ways. It's demanding, first of all, when we look at the neuropsychology of hope, when we look at how hope functions in our brain, we see it is a very, very elaborate mental construct. It takes a lot of mental energy to hope. You need to think about a future. You need to think about a better future. You need to think about how to get there. That's a lot of brain work.
The Venezuelans are laughing because they're 20 years ahead.
Okay.
There is hope. But I think hope is linked to faith. So.
Yeah, there is a strong connection there as well. But we need also to understand that it's very hard to hope. If you are skeptical, it's easy. Again, it doesn't take a lot of mental energy. But being hopeful takes mental energy. And it also takes action. If we hope for something, we need to act to do it, to do something about it. And that's very demanding. We need to devote effort and time, money sometimes, thought. You know, we like to be lazy. People like to be lazy. So hopeful is not for the lazy people. That's another disadvantage. And one of the things that I try to promote in my work is also understanding the negative sides of hope. So thanks so much for coming. I hope that you are going to understand that you need to avoid hope as much as possible, and that hope is enough. Of course, this is just a joke. My intention here, or the reasons that I talk about the dangers of hope, is that because if we understand also the problems of hope, we could work with hope better. If we just use hope as a slogan, as a catchphrase, romanticizing hope, we can't really work with it well. But if we know the good and the bad sides, we could work with hope better. So let's talk about some good sides, the merits of hope. First of all, we know that hope is an existential need. People could not live without hope. We know it from Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl, who survived the concentration camp, the Nazi concentration camp, talked about meaning and hope in the concentration camp. And from what he saw that those people who had some hope, even the tiniest one for, I don't know, a piece of bread, had at least the ability, the potential to survive. Those who lost hope had no chance to survive the concentration camp. So we know that hope is an existential need, something that we can't live without. But if we look even like broader in terms of human evolution, there are many thinkers that say hope is a mechanism for human survival. In fact, Lionel Tiger says people's overconfidence in their ability, right? Humans' overconfidence in their ability is what makes humans go forward. And in fact, everything that we see around us is made by hope. All of humans' technological advancements and all of humans' social advancements are hope-driven. So, for example, we don't have wings. We're not supposed to fly. But people have looked to the skies and the stars and the moon for thousands of years and said, we hope to be there. We want to be there. We have desires and aspirations and we believe we could do it. And they failed, and they failed, and they failed, and they succeeded. Democracy. What is democracy? Democracy is this idea that people were living under totalitarian regimes and say, no, we want to have a better life. We want freedom. We want well-being for our kids. And we think we could get it. And they failed, and they failed, and they failed, and they succeeded. Sometimes we're going back now, maybe, okay? But this is a path forward, right? So everything we see around us was made by hope. That's very strong. And lastly, we also know that this doesn't work. It works. Okay. What? I always have hope. I have it. Maybe I left it in the room. We also know that there are measurable positive outcomes of hope. We know that hopeful people have better academic achievements, have better athletic achievements, they actually live longer. So hope has many positive things and measurable outcomes. What I try to do in my work is try to find, and we'll talk about it at the end, I'm trying to talk about the optimal type of hope. What is optimal hope? It's a kind of hope that uses and exploits the merits of hope, the good sides of hope, and tries to avoid as much as possible the drawbacks. Okay, this is called optimal hope, and I'll talk about it at the end. Okay, yeah, this is really strange what's happening here, but we'll go with the flow. So, we talked about the good sides and the bad sides of hope, but we didn't say what hope is. So, there is no agreement. You know, scholars and academics, the thing that they do best is not agree, right? Is quarrel and disagree all the time. So there's no agreement about, among scholars what hope is. Some people say it's an emotion, some say it's a cognitive construct. So what I did is I went to dictionaries. And I looked at common dictionaries in many languages, see if it works in Spanish. And I found that there is a common theme and a very straightforward definition, actually a very simple definition. What is hope? It's a desire accompanied by expectation of fulfillment. That's very simple, not very sophisticated. Right? But right away we see that there are actually two components here. The first is a desire. Okay, this is also strange. Okay, the first is a desire. In order for us to hope, we need to desire something, aspire for something, dream for something, right? We don't hope for things that we don't care about. We only hope for things that we care about, and the more we care about, the more we hope that these things will materialize. So desire is the first component. And the second, is the expectation. This some belief, even the smallest one, that this thing that we want will actually happen, will transpire. So there are actually two components in hope. A wish and an expectation. A wish to attain a goal and an expectation that this goal could be attained. And in many ways, this is all we need to hope. These two components. The problem is that the use of hope in everyday language is very confusing. A good friend of mine said, I really hope that there will be peace in the Middle East, but I have no hope that there will be peace. How could you say you have no hope? You just say you hope very much. This sentence could be explained easily, because in the first part of the sentence, she said, I really, really hope that there will be peace. I wish, I desire, I aspire, I want this very badly. But I have no hope, meaning I have no expectation. I think there's no chance, or very little chance. So in many languages, hope is sometimes used to describe what people want, wish and desire, and something to describe how much they think, what is the likelihood that they're going to get. And wishes and expectations are not the same thing, but we use them as synonyms, which makes it very, very difficult to measure. And I'm a quantitative researcher. I measure stuff, so how could I measure hope if it means different things in different contexts to different people? So what I try to do is I offer what's called a bi-dimensional model of hope. Let's see this. Okay, this is all messed up. Okay, I'll try to explain. Okay. So instead of looking at hope as a unidimensional construct that has, you could either be low or high, what I try to offer is that hope is actually a bi-dimensional plane. It has two dimensions. The first is this wish dimension. And this is connected to how much we desire something, how much we want and wish and aspire for something. The strength of the dream. This is the wish. And the second dimension is the expectation dimension. How much do we think this dream is likely? What are the chances that it will happen? So here we don't have any hope because we don't want it and we think it's impossible. But as we move here, this is supposed to be here again, very funny. As we move here, our hopes increase because these are things that are very important for us and we think that we could actually achieve them. The most interesting place of hope is this place. This is where we really want something and we need it badly, but we are not sure we're going to get it. And this is true, for example, for people who have severe illness. We all hope for good health, right? But people who are sick want it even more, wish for that even more, and actually the more their illness is severe and hard, the more they wish to recover and to be healthy. But sometimes the likelihood is actually the other direction. And this is also true for people locked in 100 years of conflict, like Israelis and Palestinians. They want this thing to be over. They want the conflict to be over, but they think that the chances are very, very slim. And this is also true for the current state of Israel, for example. Israelis have high wishes and desires that the society will heal, that we will build a better community and better society. But the chances are not certain at all. So this is where hope becomes actually interesting. I want to say a few more points about hope. You need binoculars. What happens when one dimension biases the other? So we know, as a quantitative researcher, I measure the correlation between these two dimensions. I could measure how much they go together. And indeed, we find that there is a strong correlation, but it's not very strong. It's 0.2, 0.3, which means that wishes and expectations go together, but they're also independent. The question is, what happens where they're stuck too much together, when they bias and influence each other? The first thing that could happen is what we call wishful thinking. What is wishful thinking? When we want something badly, we tend to kind of raise the chances that it will happen, right? Kind of maybe too confident in the fact that it happened just because we want something. Right? This is wishful thinking. The second thing is when we think that something is impossible, we stop wanting it. And these two things are very, not dangerous, but we need to be cautious of them when we're looking for social change. Everybody is working for some social change, improvement of the lives of the community, of the Jewish community, the other community, everybody here. And we need to be kind of cautious of connecting wishes and expectations too much. It could lead us to wishful thinking, and then we don't really understand the challenges that lie ahead. And it could also lead us, because the challenges are so high, to stop wanting and wishing for what we dream for. The second question is, what is the opposite of hope? So what's the opposite of hope? Despair, apathy, fear. You know why I'm happy? Because all these answers are correct. If we look at the hope as a bidimensional construct, it actually has two opposites. One is despair. Despair is when the wishes are high. We want something badly, but we already know we're not going to get it. And the more we want it, and the more we know we're not going to get it, the more desperate we are. But the second opposite is fear. Fear is that when something that we don't want to happen, we think it's going to happen, there is a great likelihood. And the more we don't want, which is in the opposite, in the negative, and the more the expectations are high, the greater we fear or are worried. Very interesting question. Is hope necessarily action-oriented? Do we need to act when we hope? Maybe we could be passive. Maybe I could sit here and say, yeah, I hope for something, and don't do anything about it. Well, what we know from research, and also empirical research, is that there is a strong connection between hope and action. When people say they hope for something, but they don't do anything about it, they're not really hoping. They're doing something else. Maybe they are being optimistic. Optimism is hope minus action. Okay? It's hope, take away the action, now you could be optimistic, pessimistic, you could sit on the couch, do nothing about it, and you're kind of observing reality and saying, I'm optimistic about that, I'm pessimistic about that. Hope is always tied to action. We see it in empirical work, we see it in philosophical work. How much time do I have? Oh, I don't. 20 minutes? 15, it's okay, yeah, we'll be fine. We'll be done in 12. Okay. So now I want to share with you some empirical work I conduct in conflict zones. So I don't only study hope, I study hope in the context of intractable conflicts. Intractable conflicts are conflicts that are prolonged for many years. One of the conflicts, I don't have to tell you, is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Another conflict that I have a running project in is Cyprus. Okay? There is a conflict between the Greek and the Turkish Cypriots. It's been a conflict for a long time. So again, I study hope when it is almost absent, or in the times of distress and conflict. So The Hope Map project is a project that measures hope for peace in conflict zones around the world. But what I do also is I use statistical modeling to also understand the correlates of hope and what predicts hope. I could actually see what type of demographic measure or socio-political measure predicts people's hope for peace. So we're going to see some data, and what you're going to see now is actually data collected in 2019, so it's not updated, but it's a data that measures Israelis and Palestinians' hope for what I call reciprocal peace. What is reciprocal peace? It's a peace that addresses my interests and your interests. So I ask people, how much do you want some peace agreement that will address the needs of your people, but also address the needs of the other people? And how much do you think it is likely? And this is Israelis' hope for reciprocal peace. This is data from 500 Jewish Israelis, and this is a representative sample. So we could extrapolate from this data onto the general population. And as we see, most of the Jewish Israelis wish for peace, but think that there is low likelihood. And it makes sense, right? Totally makes sense. We see that also some don't want it. We need to admit that some Jewish Israelis don't want this type of reciprocal peace. No, I'm not wishing for that at all. And also some, not a lot, think it's possible. All right. Now let's look at data from the Palestinian side. This is both West Bank and the Gaza Strip. I also collect data in the Gaza Strip, but of course I don't have it updated. The last time was a year and a half ago that I collected. And this is Palestinians. Most observations are still here. Most of the Palestinians wish for this type of peace, but think it is impossible. There are also many that don't want it. And also many that think it is possible. Now when I compare the means, when I do a comparison of the means, we see actually that the wish for peace is identical. There is no significant statistical difference between Israelis and Palestinians' wish for this type of reciprocal peace. We see actually that the expectations among Palestinians is higher. Now, this is, you will say rightly, this is not updated. What happened in 2024 after October 7th? It is very difficult to collect data now in the West Bank, certainly in the Gaza Strip. But this is something that I'm going to do. But I will say that this trend, we see it always, 2019, 2021, 2022, 2023. We see that most Israelis and Palestinians wish for this kind of peace, but think it is impossible. Now let's talk about the determinants, what predicts people's hopes. The first thing is called acceptance of uncertainty. We all, as people, want certainty. We hate uncertainty, right? We like to know exactly what's going to happen in our life. But let me tell you a secret. Life is uncertain and unpredictable. The thing is that people react to this uncertainty differently. Some people are okay with this uncertainty, are more easy and comfortable with uncertainty, and some people have it very, very hard. They don't like uncertainty at all. And what we see that there is a connection between acceptance of uncertainty and the wish dimension. This is true in Israel, among Palestinians, among Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots. Okay? 4,800 people participated in this study. And we see a connection. The more people are comfortable with uncertainty, the more they allow themselves to wish and desire peace. Why? Because conflict, it's bad, but we know how it looks like. It's certain. Turkish Cypriots know how conflict looks like. Greek Cypriots know, Palestinian Israelis certainly know how conflict looks like. But we don't really know how peace looks like. So this is uncertain. But if we accept uncertainty, to some degree, we also kind of open our hearts and wish for this thing. The second thing is what we call erroneous appraisals. we also ask Israelis, Palestinians, Turkish Cypriots, Greek Cypriots, how much they think the other side wishes and expects peace. And guess what? There is an underestimation, always. People underestimate the hope for peace of the other side. And using statistical models, we see that this underestimation actually affects people's own hope. So people say, if they don't hope, why should I hope? Right? But they are mistaken because it's an underestimation. Okay, so kind of closing the talk today, there's a good question of what's more important. To wish for something or to expect it to materialize? What makes people struggle for equality, struggle for democracy? Is it their desires and wishes for these changes or their belief that they could achieve it? That's a big question. So we could answer this empirically, again using statistics. And we see that most of the empirical evidence points to the wish dimension. So most of the empirical evidence say it's important to think that what you want to achieve is possible. But it's even more important to have strong desires for these things, strong dreams, strong wishes, strong aspirations. Another person I really like is Václav Havel. Václav Havel was a Czechoslovakian playwright. He wrote plays in the 60s. But when the Soviets invaded Czechoslovakia in the late 60s, he found himself as the leader of the opposition against the Soviet invasion. He didn't mean to be, but he found himself as a leader. And he was in the Soviet prison, and he wrote a lot about hope. And he said, our hope to free Czechoslovakia from the Soviet invasion and influence was not based on the fact that we thought we could do it. We weren't really sure. But our wishes and desires for free Czechoslovakia were so strong and so unshaken and so clear for us. This is what drove our hope. So this dimension kind of led us. And lastly, we also see it when we interview Israeli and Palestinian peace activists. They also say, listen, we're not sure it's going to happen. So it's not that they are naive, but their desires and wishes and aspirations to see this country without conflict and without bloodshed is so strong, is so unquestionable. This is their driver of hope. So, to end, let's talk about this optimal hope, the best version of hope. And what I suggest is this. We said that hope has two dimensions, it's like two legs. One leg is the leg of the desire, right? The dream, the aspiration. And another is this belief that we could do it, the expectation dimension. And many times, I think we lean too much on the expectation. We ask ourselves too much, is it possible or not? Right? But we could actually tilt a little bit the balance and base our hope more on the wish dimension, the desires. And when we do this, three things happen. First, we get a much more sustainable hope. Because even if challenges come, our wishes, desires, aspirations are strong enough to withstand these challenges. If our hope is based too much on expectation, the first time there is a challenge, we say, okay, this is impossible. Our hope is dead. But if we shift a little bit the attention more to the dream, the aspiration, then we have a more sustainable hope. Second, it makes us this hope more realistic, actually. Again, if we base our hope too much on the expectation, we might not have the courage to look at reality as it is, as the challenges. And then we are being naive. But if our wishes and desires are strong enough, then we could say, okay, I could now look at the reality without me being afraid that this hope is going to be now crushed. Yeah, I have the courage to look at the problems. Say it out loud because I'm not afraid. My wishes, desires, and aspirations for this thing I want are strong. And last, this is something magical about hope. You know that hope leads to action. We already said that in order for us to hope, we need to be active. But the magic of hope is that it actually also works the other way around. When we are active, when we are involved, we are engaged in pursuing our goal, suddenly we feel hope. Right? You felt this when you are doing something, usually with other people. Right? Usually this is when we're working together as a group, sometimes we feel this hope. Now where does this hope come from? We could have two explanations. One is that we think that our goals are getting nearer. But I want to provide a different explanation. Okay? And I'll give this by an example of what I did. I told you after the 7th of October, I also went many times with my kids to pack food. Okay? So we went like hundreds of thousands of Israelis. You know what happened? The restaurants changed what they did, and they just prepared meals. And then people came and packed them, and then people came with their cars and took them to soldiers, to evacuees. So I went many times with my kids to do this. And I was there, with other maybe 20 people packing food, and I suddenly felt hope. Not necessarily because things were getting better. This was in the middle of the war. There were sirens on. We were running to the shelter. Not because of this. Why? Because suddenly we saw that this dream that we are talking about, this Israel that is about solidarity and about working together, right? All people from all kinds of life, walks of life are devoted now to this thing. Suddenly it's around us. This is how it looks like. This is cool. This is what we're talking about. This is what we want. Right? Not the Israel that is divisive and cruel, but no. So another thing that happens is that in many ways when you do what you hope for, you kind of bring the future to the present. You have a miniature, small model of what you want. You see it in front of you. You really feel it. It's a very, very strong feeling. All right. We have time or we need to stop? 5 minutes. All right. Now let's talk about the conflict a little bit. All right. In 5 minutes we'll talk about the conflict. It's easy. 100 years ago. What is the current situation and what is the situation for the future? Now, the situation is terrible. I don't have to tell you. There is a war going on in Israel on the northern front and the Gaza front. There are soldiers in Gaza. People are dying, sirens. It's terrible. And also Palestinians are paying a very, very, very tough price. There are tens of thousands of people killed in Gaza, including civilians. The situation is very, very bad. But what we do know is that this paradigm, this idea that the conflict could be managed, does not longer hold. And from this trauma, we have an opportunity to change paradigm. So if many people thought, okay, we could keep the conflict like this, we will manage it. This thought is not relevant anymore. Now it could go in two ways. It could go into further escalation, or it could go to some sort of resolution. It's like every trauma could lead us to stress, post-traumatic stress disorder, or post-traumatic growth. Right? And this is indeed a trauma. And indeed what we hear is there are new paths and new voices suddenly from this terrible situation that are talking about peace, conciliation, not in a naive way. Not because necessarily for the sake of the other, no. For the sake of us, finding some way for resolution, for conciliation. And I'll give you two examples. The first is Mao Zedong. I don't know if you heard about Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong, he lost his two parents in the attack on the 7th of October at Nativa Asara. He was, before that, an entrepreneur. He established the Abraham hostels in Israel. It's like really cool hotels. And he started with great power to start working for peace, conciliation, some resolution, with a lot of people joining. He is not naive. The people are not naive or dreamy. No, they understand that there are going to be a lot of challenges, but they are still working. And also we hear this in the Palestinian streets as well, mainly in the West. And the second thing is also very important and has to do with a connection between Jews and Arabs inside of Israel. There are many, many problems between Jews and Arabs in Israel, but many people feel that this is actually the right time to start healing. Because on the 7th of October and afterwards, Arabs were very much engaged in helping Israel stand on its feet. And this organization, Omdim Beyachad, standing together, is one of the leaders of this idea that we are Arabs here, we are Jews, we are going to live together here as equal citizens, we're all devoted to this society, and they're doing wonderful job with young people. Now, this is just two examples in a very, very terrible time. It's not that everything is like this, no, these are just tiny lights, okay? But as we talked about this tiny flame of a candle, this is an example. So thanks so much, and for the pleasure. And you can scan this. The QR code leads to my website, and you can find more details and research. So thanks.
Me parece que en la mañana tuvimos una mesa de desayuno en la que justamente hablábamos de qué tanto estamos haciendo nosotros en nuestras organizaciones, en nuestros países, y esto nos puede dar mucha información para sentarnos un momento y pensar si estamos yendo en la dirección correcta en cuanto a esperanza. Y obviamente yo tengo muchas preguntas, pero ese es el momento en el que todos ustedes pueden hacer las preguntas que quieran, aprovechando que está aquí Oded.
Hello, my name is Daniela, and I have a question because I have been receiving a lot of polls coming out of Gaza, where the inhabitants there, the Gazans, approved by 73%, sometimes 85% what happened on October 7, and support Hamas to repeat it again and again. So how do you work with hope when the polls coming out of Gaza reflect such a majority that support such attacks? So, I mean, there's one thing is what we wish for, but the other thing is the real world. So when you're working with the data that's coming out of those measurements, and it's so, like, you know, evident of a reality, how do you, like, marry hope with those facts?
Another question related.
Okay. I was to relate to the same topic, but maybe the answer is that what happened on the 7th of October for those inhabitants of the Gaza Strip, the Palestinian side, was a source of hope for them. What happened and what they achieved with those attacks gave them a lot of hope that actually they can destroy the Zionist entity. So do you saw that in your research, or do you see a source of hope for those Palestinians that dream and wish the destruction of Israel? This gave them a confirmation, an actual confirmation on reality that it may happen, that is achievable?
Maybe I'll answer this because this is all. Yeah.
What we just said, how is that reflected on the matrix that you showed? Because you see a lot of hope there, but it's only for destruction of the.
Right. So first of all, these are very, very important questions, and I thank you for raising this. And I want to say, before I even start, something about you know, we live in an era of manipulation, right? When people that are controlling media and controlling the public discourse could easily manipulate and say some story. I want to say something as someone that studies political science. The attacks of the 7th of October have nothing to do with real struggle for Palestinian statehood. They have killed Arab Muslims. They have killed 30 Thai people. What does that have to do with struggle? It's supposed to be in the name of the struggle, right? But in reality, it is an act of pure brutality, which has a kind of like a primitive motivation, you know, pure revenge and pure violence with very little to gain. But afterwards, then people tell the story, a different type of story. The Palestinians try to almost dismiss and not talk about the actual cruelty and talk about other things as well, and of course talk about the Israeli attacks inside the Gaza Strip. And we know, of course, that extreme fundamentalist movements, they build on the violence on them. They actually grow. The more you hit them with violence, they actually grow, right? They say, now we are the victims, now we're doing this. So I completely understand this, what are you saying, and for me, I think one of the reasons, there are two reasons we see the big support of Hamas, for example, in the Gaza Strip. The one is that the story has been manipulated, right? And now the story is not about the 7th of October, it's about, you know, the Israeli attacks, and media is controlled, you see only part of the information, right? We live in silos. The second thing is that, you know, we always need leaders. In many ways, people prefer leaders that are bad than non-leaders. And you know where this is written first? This is written first in the book of Samuel. In the time of the judges, the people went to Samuel and they say, we need a king. Remember this? And he said, listen, this king will take taxes from you, will take your sons to be soldiers and they will be killed in the battlefield to fight his own wars. He will take your daughters and make them his slave, and he will take your everything. Are you sure you want a king? What did they say? Yes, we want a king. This idea of needing a leader, even if it's a bad leader, is something very intrinsic to man, to humankind. The problem is that when there is no strong, moderate alternatives, people will go for the extreme. It's tempting, right? When there's no strong, moderate views, people will go to the extreme. And so Hamas has been one of the only options. The Palestinian Authority, which is much more moderate, has been weakened by Israel deliberately by the government for the last 15 years. And we all know the stories of money for Hamas, etc., etc. So this was in many ways the alternative. This is what they could only hang to represent. If we want to rectify, if we want to fight extremism, we need to strengthen and empower moderate views. This is almost the only way to find radical, is not to, because if you hurt it, sometimes it grows. But if you empower and expand moderate views, it kills extremism, because there is a positive alternative. So I don't know if it answers, maybe only partially.
Hi, thank you very much for your exposition, it's really great. You mentioned in the last part that managing the conflict is something that was one of the components, and it really has been going around my head all these months about the conceptia, that term in Israel that they call the conceptia, that they could manage the conflict and the status quo can be, managed like I don't know with any other conflict. So given the fact that the 7th of October has been a breaking point in many ways, and that your data from 2019 is or is not actual. I mean, if it's relevant or not. How do you see the reactions inside Israel, especially? Because outside Israel, we could see different reactions because there is another kind of struggle we have to engage in the Golan. So I would like you to elaborate a little bit more about this kind of, so what, because something happened. I mean, something happened. There were, I mean, the kind of attacks and the kind of, I don't want to enter into politics, but facts is that something very strong and very harsh happened 7th of October.
He's Joseph from Costa Rica. Introduce yourself and make up a question, okay? Not a statement. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Natasha from Brazil. Thank you, amazing, really interesting topic. I was really interested on the study and the matrix about desiring hope and expecting hope. So my question is, there was one quadrant that was very populated, which is people who do not want hope, don't wish for hope. Do we know more about that? Why do people not wish for hope?
Okay, so the first question was, if I understand correctly, was kind of what's happening now in the Israeli public discourse about this idea of, let's call it, peace, conciliation, resolution. So first of all, we need also to always remember that we are now in a state of war. And think about car kind of, driving fast and then falling off a cliff. Now, when you fall off the cliff, what do? You defend yourself. You don't think a lot about the future. You think about the now, right? And in many ways, we're still falling. So maybe the car ran off on the 7th of October because the war is still going on, and in the north the situation is bad, and there is internal tensions inside, and all of the trouble. We're stumbling in this car, and we're trying to protect ourselves. So it's very, very difficult to think about the future now. I think two things. One, when the car settles, when the war is over, and the hostages come back, amen. Then, you go out of the car, and you see, okay, I have a broken limb, and I don't have an arm, but now you could start healing and thinking about the future, and I believe that when the war is going to be over, people are going to talk about much more seriously about some sort of agreement, resolution, peace, conciliation, whatever you want to call it, some way that we could live. We don't have to be friends, we don't have to love, we need to stop the bloodshed and the violence, and the people understand the pain and the price is so huge. Right now, there is a little bit of this type of discourse about peace. I work also with Palestinian colleagues, and I hear this as well, and also in Israel. About I hope that answers a little bit what you asked. You were asking about the models and about the people who don't want. Okay. First of all, we know that some people don't want this type of peace. No, they want exclusiveness. Who is going to live here? Only me. If you go to Palestinian schools in the West Bank and you look at the map, you see the whole map and it says Palestine. If you go to schools in Israel and you look at the map, what does it say? What does it say? Israel. There's no green line. There is no green line in schools in Israel. So this is type of exclusive, only me. Right? And so some people don't want this type of reciprocal peace. We know we could relate it to age. The younger generation have less wishes than the older generation. We could connect it to gender. women have higher wishes than men and higher expectation as well. Just to show you that if women were the leaders, we'll be in a much, much better place. Much better place for sure. And we see it in the political ideology, of course. The more people identify as right-wing or hawkish, we see that they want this peace less.
Voy de este lado. Preguntas y preséntense. Preguntas.
Hi, I'm Memo Tradesman from Mexico. Every time that I hear this sentence, I'm in conflict, and I wanna know what you think about this sentence. They say that be careful about your wish because it became true. I don't know if I explain myself. What do you think about this sentence? Be careful about your wish, about what you wish, because it can be true.
Hi, I'm Mariano, and you slightly talk about the fact that there is a difference between ages. Now, we are all leaders from different Jewish communities in the diaspora in different places, and ideally, our concept of hope should be very similar. How can we arrive to a common ground when we have millennials and Gen Z, and their hope is there will not be Israel, and they are still part of our communities, and the older generation saying, and we in the middle remember wanting the hostages back, and these hopes, they will never meet.
So, okay, again, great questions. We could stay here, I think, forever. The first thing is a very smart sentence. Be careful of what you wish for, because it might come true. And this is kind of a sentence that says, listen, we need to be careful. We need to be very accurate and clear what we wish for, and that it will be interpreted in this exact way and not in other ways. So I think it's kind of a call. I am going to maybe incorporate it in some of my thoughts, to a call to not wish for all sorts of things or things that you are not really sure of, to be very accurate. You need to be cautious. It's a responsibility. To hope for something is a responsibility, right? So we need to know what we hope for. We need to know how to speak about it clearly, articulate this. It's an interesting sentence. And then about this age issue, right? So this is a huge challenge in many ways, right? The connection between generations. Once generations were very close apart, not only in terms of the age, but also, people live together with their parents and their grandparents, and sometimes their great-great-parents. But, in the last probably 150 years, this changed a lot. And now there's a huge gap between what's called the epistemic gap, meaning what is the information, the source of information that we rely on, and it's different between the generations. So I'll tell you an anecdote, and then maybe... So one of my colleagues, partner, Beatrice Hassler, she's from the Reichman University. She saw this fact about wishes and expectations being low among youngsters. And she's a VR specialist. She does the research with virtual reality. And what she did is she made this virtual reality when people see themselves as older selves. So you put this and you look and you see yourself as your old skin, and you look at the mirror, it's like, and you see yourself old. And what she did is, some of her students, she put this VR, and then a day afterwards, she asked them about wishes and expectations for peace. And another student that was a control group, they put the VR, but they saw themselves regular, the same age. And what we saw is that there was a gap. And suddenly, just because people experience themselves as older selves, they had higher wishes and expectations. Now, how could we explain that? In fact, how could we explain that there is higher expectations among the older generations? They have lived in this conflict for so many years, and they have higher expectations than the young. It doesn't make sense. But perhaps with this old age comes perspective, comes wisdom, comes priority. We are less reckless.
We have less time.
Perhaps we are this is very true, we have less time. So people are starting to think about the important things in life. The pain is mounting, has accumulated. So as youngsters, you know, it's for me, for example, when I was in the military and I was in all sorts of frightening moments or combat moments, I wasn't afraid at all. Yeah, I was reckless. I didn't mind with my friends, you know. When I was a dad and I was a news cameraman for a Canadian news agency, and I went to film the Second Lebanese War, 2006, summer of 2000, and missiles were flying. I used to not be frightened at all. But then Aviv, my eldest child, was born. She was 9 months old. And suddenly I was so afraid. I said, what am I doing here? You know, the missiles are flying. I have to go back home. So this idea of being a parent, being a grandparent, having responsibility, perspective, priorities because life is getting short, all of these perhaps is one of the things that makes this generation gap, maybe. Now, how do we work with that? That's a huge question, a huge challenge. Perhaps, work with the young generations in their own language, in their own rhythm. We're using their, you know, I say to my girls, look at my post on Facebook. What is this? This is something else now, right? So understanding what the platforms are that the young generation use and try to work with them on the content together.
3 preguntas más.
Hi, how are you? Thank you very much. My name is Natalie Haratz. I'm from Venezuela, but I live in Miami. And I'm part of a group called Loving Moms. And I would like to say a question, but I don't know how to ask it, so I'm going to try. So one of our big impacts of our group has been to create a platform for people to do, as you call, the active hope. Okay, and it has been, you know, people come to us and they say, thank you very much for doing this because you give me hope even to walk, you know, so it has been amazing. And it's a big impact personally for people, and as a community, I believe so, but it's very hard to measure. So how do you continue with something that even for us to question ourselves, what are we doing? You know, we know that we're creating an impact. We know that people are very grateful and it's needed. But how do you measure that, and and it's important, but how do you make that into something that can activate in a different way, can make a change? Because creating awareness for hostages and making people feel hope, for now is the most important thing because we have them in our head. But then what's next, right?
I have to formulate my question first. Raquel Schlosser, Institute for Transgender Studies, Mexico. Very little contribution. My father was an Auschwitz survivor. And when I asked him how did he survive, he always said, I don't know, I only wanted to live one day more. And since then, I live the same thing. And he left when he was 96. But my question is about the content of hope. Because the measure is very interesting, but I work with the memories that are left after the social violence, and they go through generations. generations, not directly. I'm a daughter of an Auschwitz survivor, I don't have the problem. I work for peace, but I have learned about the memories. Volkan does a lot of work. There are many theories, hallbacks about the memories, collective memories. Yes, but not directly trauma. Transgenerational trauma, which leaves memories. So the content of hope, which was like the connection of your question, the content of hope is important. So how do you, when you make the research, how do you define each time what's hope for the other one?
Another one and the last
No,
one.
I'll forget the questions. So, okay. So I'll start. I think you said two things, okay? If I can recall. Of course, you can record, yeah, of course.
This is a question that we have been.
Yeah, so, and we could chat later on. So I'm here and we could chat and we could. So I think there were two questions here. One about measurement. And many of you in organizations and initiatives, you want to achieve something and you want to know that how well you did. And so I'm a quantitative, I believe in quantitative research. So what I advise is to work with people who do this type of measurement and try to measure your kind of your achievements. But the impact, and this is very important. It needs the critical, the difficult question is, what is it actually we want to achieve? We need to define it very clearly, because if we want to measure it, we know what we want to measure. And many times we think we know what the goals are, but we're not really sure, or we're building on goals that were established long ago and they're not really relevant anymore. So I call, and this is again a time for renewal, right? I think we are here in a time of kind of thinking about new stuff. So if you sit with your group and really define what you are looking for, and then help someone that does research to measure this, after one time point and 2 time points, or in experimental studies, I think it will. The second issue is the content, like what you said, what next? You talked about the hostages and you said what next? Well, this is a great question. We could chat about that. I need to learn more about what you want to achieve. It is probably connected to the values that you want to promote, because before we have goals and all of that, we have the values that are important for us, and we want these values to be manifested in every project, in every initiative, in every program that we're doing. So probably start with the values and then think about what next, but I'm here to. And now for your question, I think I could say 2 things. First of all, very correct. I talked about hope, not what you hope for. Some people could hope to eliminate you, to kick you out. Yes, there are some people who have these hope. This is their desires, and they believe they can do it. Okay, so certainly the fact that we are talking about hope doesn't necessarily talk that everything that we hope for is positive or legitimate. Of course not. But the second thing, you talked about past and future, and I want to say something about that as well. Past is very important. It's very, very important. It's what we are. It made us what we are, etc. Right? But also, sometimes we are stuck in the past. And in conflicts, this is actually one of the biggest challenges. Because what is conflict? Who started it? Who was here first? Who has been victimized more, etc., etc. And we always go to past. Actually, one of my students did analyzed the speeches of Israeli and Palestinian leaders in the United Nations. And the first thing we did is, okay, how many verbs and nouns are in the past and how much in the future? How many people are talking about what will happen versus what? And both Israelis and Palestinians talk 3 times more about the past than the future. Okay? So we talk about the past once. But if we think, you can think about it like this, okay? In conflict, what we do is we take some anchor, right, some weight, and we throw it backwards, right? And we are tied to this past, and tied to who was here first, and tied to the victim, and tied to that, and we're so. In conflict resolution, what we do is we take this weight and we throw it into the future, okay? And we are future-oriented. This is hope. And then you have this, and then you are starting to pull in this direction and trying to bring what you hope for into the present. So it's kind of a switching the paradigm, and it's hard. We are used to think about the past. But in many ways, hope says no. This is, and Mao Zedong, by the way, that I showed you, he said something that really caught my attention. He said, we could forgive ourselves, perhaps the enemy, about what happened. But we could never forgive ourselves or the enemy about what would happen. So if any responsibility we have, it's for the future. Kids, grandkids, etc. Right? So what I encourage us is to be future-oriented as much as possible.
Gracias. תודה רבה.